everyone. Thanks for joining us on Relational Practice, a social work podcast. I'm Dr. Jodie Park.
I'm Mackey.
We're both private practice social workers here in New South Wales, Australia, working in the fields of child protection, out-of-home care and trauma.
And we are recording this episode on Darrell Land. As always, we'd love for you to follow our podcast and connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, or via our YouTube page. We'll be adding content and videos to the platforms as much as we can.
Yeah. And please send us any emails, any messages you'd like us to kind of get, any topics you'd like us to talk about to our email relationalpractice01@gmail.com.
How are you?
Yeah, I'm okay. I'm not sure what we're going to talk about today, Rose. It'll be a great conversation though.
We'll see. Maybe no one will ever hear this episode. Who knows?
Let's hope not. We've had such a good response. We say that like every few episodes, don't we? But it just always amazes me just how many people are actually listening.
Yes, and from where in the world they're listening from.
Yes.
Really, yeah, it's crazy.
And it's still so strange when people say, "Oh, I heard your podcast the other day." And I must have like a stunned look on my face because I'm like, wow, people are actually listening. That's kind of terrifying, but also great.
Yes, we started this with a very clear goal, which was to provide a space for people who work in the fields of, social work, welfare, to have a bit of a conversational podcast where maybe there's a little bit of learning and a bit of laughing.
Yeah.
But it is crazy to think we started this maybe thinking no one was really going to listen and we could remain a little bit anonymous.
Yeah. But I mean, how good if it just gets bigger and bigger? I'd love it.
We would love it. It would be amazing.
Be amazing for this to be, we say it all the time, our full-time job. Maybe one day.
Who knows?
All right, so today we are going to try and have a conversation about emotional behavioural regulation, but we want to talk about that through a trauma lens. And this is it's really weird how this came about, because I sent Rose a message saying, hey, let's talk about this, whilst at the same time Rose was actually going to message me to go, let's talk about exactly the same thing, which is kind of good.
It's kind of crazy.
Do you want to start with what you thought it would be a good idea, Rose? Like, what is it that you saw? Because you mentioned a clip that I didn't see.
Yeah, I think I was watching a reel, and it was someone talking about how we throw the word trauma-informed around a lot.
Yeah.
And that whilst it's really good to be trauma-informed, and it's amazing that lots of different professionals have an understanding of the impacts of trauma and have really, kind of as a society, we've deepened our knowledge around trauma, and we generally, in our fields of work, lots of people will tell you that they're trauma-informed. The reel I was watching, though, was talking about the difference between being trauma-informed and trauma-responsive.
Yeah.
And this person who I wish I could remember, because once the reel was gone, it was then, a couple of minutes later that I was like, oh, how do I find that again? But being trauma responsive is about using your knowledge of trauma and actually in the moment when you're with clients that are actually, falling down their ladder, they're in flight, or shut down or freeze, that you're able to remain at the top of your ladder, that you're able to use all of your knowledge and skills about trauma. And then in the moment, I think we call it reflexiveness. In the moment, you're able to use your state, being calm and connected and safe at the top of the ladder, use all your knowledge to actually assist that person to co-regulate or to provide a trauma-responsive interaction. And I think then I started thinking about all the different services that I've worked in and around and just different professionals, and me myself thinking, I have a lot of knowledge about trauma. Absolutely. I would say I've been trauma-informed for a long time.
Yeah.
But actually considering what does trauma responsiveness actually look like with our clients, and how often would I say I'm trauma responsive as opposed to trauma informed, and then think about the impact on our clients or the services we're working in.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine if we were all being much more trauma responsive,
Mm-hmm.
what that would look like and feel like for our clients, and what the outcomes of service interventions may be.
I mean, it would be amazing, wouldn't it? It really would. Because I guess what we're talking about, what you're talking about, it was kind of echoing what I think, is that it really is the action of being trauma informed, isn't it? It's the things that you do to integrate that knowledge into practice.
Yes.
Yeah. So probably if we think about it in that way, it's the action of being trauma informed. And there's probably a lot of things that are already happening that people do day in, day out, that they don't have it as a label of being trauma responsive.
Yes.
Or maybe they do. And maybe everyone's just like 10 steps ahead of us.
Perhaps. I wonder too, on the other side, if we're trauma informed.
Yeah.
And we might be working for, you know, an organisation that really pushes KPIs or outcomes or standards of some sort, and the pressure then to actually do what's required from the organisation's perspective in the moment when a client, maybe you've gone out, you know, maybe let's say on a home visit with the purpose to undertake a piece of work that's mandated by your organisation.
Yeah.
You get to your client's house and they are completely in shutdown.
Yeah.
I wonder, because I've worked in places like that for many years, how we can easily let go of the trauma responsiveness and just go along to tick a box because I came here to do this aspect of my job today. I can notice that you're struggling, but we'll have a little bit of conversation and I'll kind of draw you along so we can actually get my needs met or my organisation's needs met. And then I wonder about all of those organisations that I've worked in and around. They all say they're trauma informed, but they're not actually taking the next step possibly of becoming trauma responsive.
Well, do you think that's because, I mean, it's so much pressure, I think, to be trauma responsive. Like, I think for an organisation, I think you need to have well-trained staff. You need to have a focus on, I guess, your staff being able to use professional judgment and to read a situation and respond accordingly, which I think is tricky when professional judgment is not always something that is promoted, because it usually means that you have to do things in a different way, which is what you're talking about. And that way sometimes takes a lot longer.
I was just going to say, it's the time, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because it's about relationships.
Yeah.
And it's about meeting the person where they're at that point in time.
Yeah.
And most organisations, most, you know, larger scale places of work, they have an overwhelming amount of demand for their service and oftentimes very limited resources. So you can see the kind of catch-22.
Well, and I also think it's this kind of discourse between getting the job done versus just this kind of operational consistency lens where we have to do things the same way and everyone has to do it, because that way we kind of are promoting a service that I'm thinking of a word, but I can't think of the word. Like a service that a predictable service.
A predictable service.
Yeah.
And if you think about predictability, consistency and reliability, absolutely three of the key kind of ingredients for, you know, a therapeutic organisation or a therapeutic relationship. So I understand the need to be those things. But how can you be consistent and reliable without having the, you know, tick boxes of the next step of the, you know, case plan or care review or, you know, intake assessments follows this process and then we do this form and then this form. How do we be more person-centred, remaining consistent and predictable from the organisation, but not necessarily just going about to do the tasks that we were sent to do because that's the timeline or those are the expectations of the agency?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a really big question. Because in some ways, I can actually see that, you know, agencies need to meet requirements, don't they? They have their own goals. They have funding criteria. Workers have their own, like you said, KPIs that they need to meet.
Yes.
And those things are not going to go away. So it's about how do you make them trauma responsive? That's what I think.
The organisation.
Well, the processes and the expectations. So, yeah, you're right. Most agencies these days will say, oh, we're trauma informed, because I guess you have to say that. But then how do you actually transfer that into action by making that those organizational expectations more trauma responsive?
Even the policies and the processes.
Yeah. I mean, is that even possible? Is it? I don't know if it is or not. I think it depends on the agency. But I also go back to that point that it really depends also on the, I guess, the skill and the knowledge of your staff, and whether you're, as an agency, able to invest in building and promoting that. So that you actually have a workforce who actually feels confident to exercise professional judgment when required. It's a big question.
It's a huge question. I think the other layer of it is, as individual practitioners, we need to know ourselves, and we need to know how we respond when, because we know about transference and counter-transference, or when someone's sliding down their ladder. Our body's cueing safety and cueing danger just like their bodies. So I think the other part of it is, how do, as practitioners, we know ourselves. We know if we're regulated, we're within our window of tolerance, and if we're not, and we're in the field with clients, or we're sitting in the therapy room with clients, how do we bring ourselves back up to safety and to connection? And how long does that take us? And do we know the days where we actually probably shouldn't be face-to-face with the client?
Yeah.
And then, how does that translate to your organizational needs if you're saying, today's just, I'm unable to be within my window of tolerance. I'm unable to actually do my work in a trauma responsive way today. We've talked about this in a previous podcast where, people have said, oh, can't do that level 1 today. But seriously, how can organizations respond to that? Because we're all humans. We bring our whole selves to work. We all, have different experiences and different contexts. It's a big ask, isn't it?
Well, it's a big ask because the work still needs to get done.
Yes.
And you can't unfortunately always be your best self, can you? So I can see both sides of that. I can definitely see both sides of that. So maybe it's more about trying to teach people some really strong self-care strategies that you can use in the moment to bring yourself down, up on the ladder, but down in terms of your kind of, maybe if you're heightened in terms of your emotional regulation. I guess it depends on what theory you're using to explain it,
doesn't it?
But maybe that's also something that could be really useful.
So you're talking about investment in wellbeing strategies for employees from their organizations, or
I'm talking but not that ridiculous training that we all have. I'm sure everyone who listens to this has probably sat through, where you have someone talking about self-care and it's these like airy-fairy long-term strategies around, well, on the weekend I'm going to look after myself and have a nice warm bath. I mean, that's amazing, but what are you going to do right here, right now, if you are in a situation where you can feel your body change, where you can feel yourself start to escalate? How are you going to bring yourself down? And they have to be strategies that that people are promoted to develop for themselves, because everyone's strategies need to be different.
And even the step before that is, are you aware of when you are not regulated and what it looks like and feels like in your own body? Because if you're not aware that you're actually not regulated,
that's true.
No self-care strategy in this world's going to help you, because you need to be able to identify it for yourself.
Yeah, that's true.
And I think that's kind of like a bit of a pendulum, isn't it? Some days I'm much better able to recognize the signs.
Yeah.
And some days, and I did it recently with a client, I was in an assessment and I was so frustrated, but I actually in the moment didn't realize. It wasn't until I was driving home, and when you start to try and process, well, I do, process what's happened, I was like, I actually was not regulated for the entire time I was in that person's home. And I was asking very intrusive and invasive questions because it's an assessment. And I thought, wow, I wonder how much I've impacted her, because she was not regulated when I attended to start the assessment. And I spent a bit of time, because I was very aware at the start of the assessment, and tried to just have general conversation and co-regulate. She was very proud of a particular thing in her home, and I let her talk for longer about it. Had no bearing on the assessment, but just trying to use, social cues to co-regulate. I don't think that person ever actually was regulated in that time, but I think the countertransference occurred and I was unaware for a period of time. And at some point, I think when I look at my notes for the end of the assessment, I got a different type of information, and the questions I asked were very different to the, I can tell you from this point to this point, I must have been very unregulated. But I didn't know in the moment.
Well, that's kind of interesting, isn't it? And it's interesting that you can see the impact that had on the activity you were doing.
Yeah. Definitely impacted it in a negative way.
Well, I mean, I can think of lots of examples where that's happened, where you might be doing something that's quite high stress, and because you are reacting to what's happening as well internally, you probably are not managing that situation as well as you probably could be, which then in turn escalates the other person even higher.
And that's all I was doing. We were we were those tornadoes going together, not for the whole duration, but there was a good 30 minutes of that when I look back at my notes and I think, well, you were not regulated, Rose, and you just, your energies were matching. And she definitely continued to escalate in her dysregulation.
Yeah.
So I hate to say it. She became much more dysregulated. And what I then thought, because I thought about it for a long time after, when you're writing up your notes and trying to put the pieces together and prepare, because I'm going, I'm not finished that piece of work, so I need to go back and see this person. But I don't know, I was typing the notes and it just hit me. It was also this particular time of day. So I'm not very good in the evenings.
Yes, same.
Much better, in the morning or very late at night. But between 5 and 7:30 p.m, I'm not very good.
Are you better late at night?
Really late at night? Yes.
Like what? Doing what?
I could start writing at my computer from 9 o'clock onwards and go to like 1, 2 in the morning.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
But between 5 p.m. and 7:30 p.m, I'm not a nice wife, a nice mother, a nice worker. And I looked and I was like, that's the time I was doing this assessment. Isn't that interesting?
I'm not nice in the afternoon or nighttime because I don't care enough about what I'm doing to want to be there. I honestly just want to be at home. And I think that's like that bothered me for a bit. But then I realized all those years where you'd still be at work at 11, 12, 1, 2 in the morning, honestly, it took its toll.
Yeah.
Because now I'm like, if I have to work past 6 p.m, I get really cranky.
See, and you think about from a trauma responsive lens.
Yeah.
Just even knowing that, you wouldn't typically then book appointments.
I don't.
At that time and that's been trauma responsive.
Yeah.
And it's self-care. You're not good. It's not going to be good for the person you're working with. And your self-care is, I'm not doing appointments between these hours.
No.
It doesn't have to be this, time onerous, activity self-care. It can be about as simple as knowing yourself and where you have that luxury, I guess, or privilege, booking appointments in and around what works best for you and your regulation.
Yeah, I'd much rather work from 7 a.m. I could work solidly 7 a.m. until like 4:30, and then I'm like out.
Then you're done.
I'm done.
Yeah.
And you know what happens when I get done, Rose? You've seen it a lot.
Yes, I have.
I'm just completely out. All right. Okay, so I think we're clear around what our definition of trauma responsiveness, and I think that's a very, what's the word I'm looking for? Accepted definition of what trauma responsiveness means.
Yes.
It's the action of being trauma informed, and it's the way that you integrate theory into practice.
Yes.
Yeah.
The space of knowing what trauma does and being able to respond differently in the moment.
Yeah. So let's now apply that to emotional behavioural regulation. and use that as a lens to make sense of times where people are dysregulated, particularly children, I think.
Yeah.
Because I think that is so interesting. When you talk to different disciplines who have different lenses to make sense of regulation dysfunction, the way that the labels that are used, we all use our different labels. Every profession's got their own labels, their own terminology. But the labels and the way that it's kind of defined really depends on the lens, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
And I think I'm thinking particularly about perhaps a child who might be, let's go quite introverted. So a child who might be quite inhibited in terms of their emotional their emotional responses, who just want to be that kid that just kind of sits there and doesn't want any attention. I think that we know from literature that that child often gets overlooked in terms of, whether there are any additional needs or not, because they're not drawing attention to themselves. But from if you are kind of looking at that child and the way that they interact, say particularly maybe in an educational setting, from this kind of trauma responsive lens, then the meaning you're going to attach to that child's strategies of keeping themselves safe is going to be so different to, say, if you were viewing this from
a very outgoing, loud child. I think that you might typically hear that ADHD word thrown around because they're very busy moving from activity to activity and their emotions are very, very much in your face.
But how would you, if you were using a different lens, and it wasn't probably a fair question to ask you, how would you then define that child who's really quiet, who's really inhibited, who's really kind of there closed off?
If you weren't using that lens, I think you'd typically see and hear comments like attentive.
Yep.
Pays attention.
Yep.
Not disruptive.
Yeah.
Almost like that a pleasure to have in class, a pleasure to be around because they're quiet. They're not causing issues. They're not disruptive. They're not asking or demanding for anything. They're just there. They're recognised, but, just a pleasure to be around them from a behaviouralist point of view because they're quiet and they're not creating havoc.
Yeah. And there might even be comments about, a bit of a daydreamer, just kind of staring off into space.
So shy. This is just a shy person.
Yeah, but from a trauma responsive lens, if we apply that lens to what we're seeing, we should actually be a little bit concerned about what we're seeing, because all of those things together, so someone who's really quiet, doesn't draw attention, maybe daydreaming, maybe just kind of, really keeping to themselves, it's not behavior that's consistent with what you'd expect, say this kid's 10, from a 10-year-old. If the behaviour is not consistent with the age and the stage of development, then the behaviour is a worry.
Yes.
And it should be seen as a worry.
So it's about really paying attention to, I guess, the development at the time and the experience of the child and what's kind of the norm around for other 10-year-olds.
Yes.
And instead of it being, this is an easy child who's just bit shy.
Yeah.
Just a bit, they're lacking confidence, but they'll get it. They'll get there.
Yeah.
Maybe digging deeper and applying a trauma responsive lens and thinking, what else could this actually be telling me?
Yeah. Yep.
Because it could actually be that this person is immobilized. They're in shutdown.
Mm-hmm.
And they're actually, that's what we're seeing. We're seeing a child that's just shut down from the world.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we normally see, we're still thinking about children, we normally see what you said before, those externalized behaviors, don't we? And it's... Go.
No, you go.
I was going to say it's because that's more visible.
Yes, and that's what that's what people are challenged by in the world, wherever it is, in classrooms, in playgrounds, in sporting clubs, in music, the child that has the big emotions.
Yeah.
It's a challenge for whoever is in and around that person, and it's often the focus, as opposed to the child that's trying to blend into the back wall and actually no one is noticing because they're just easy to be around because they're not demanding of anything. Yeah.
And from when we did our episode on DMM, the DMM model of attachment and adaptation, we could say that that child who's really inhibited maybe is now displaying external big behaviors because they're so overwhelmed internally. And I think that's the thing as well, understanding the motivator for those big behaviors. Is it because they are so overwhelmed, their coping strategies are no longer working for them, and this is like they're at their peak?
Yes.
Or is it because this is a child who has always just displays big emotions? That's how they manage any change in internal state. So they're two very different. The behaviors look the same, but the motivator for those behaviors are very different.
Very different.
And I think that's kind of, when I think of emotional behavioural regulation, I think we need to teach people to look for that. What could be the possible motivators? Because the way you address those behaviors is so different.
Yes.
What do you think? You're nodding like I'm not sure if you're agreeing or
No,
just...
I am agreeing. I am just thinking about, some clients I'm working with, and then I think I lose track of what you're saying. But I do think, especially for the children that generally, and now you're testing me, when type C and type A kind of generally a type maybe C, and then you're that overwhelmed, you become, so if you're, maybe you got the types wrong, but if you are that child that generally you're kind of shut down, immobilized, and you're not outwardly showing your emotions, you're using your brain.
Yeah.
And then that's not working. You then become very emotionally reactionary, emotionally reactive.
Yeah.
I can't speak today. It is that the motivation is different. And I think, as you were talking, I was thinking, I wish I'd known this so long ago, because it changes how you intervene, and it changes how you actually, the curiosity around what you're seeing.
Yeah. Oh, it changes everything.
Yeah.
Once you apply a different lens to understand what might be happening for somebody, and we are talking about children, but this applies to anybody, then it changes the way you make sense of that behaviour.
Yes.
Because it has to then change the way you might work on helping co-regulation or self-regulation.
Yes. And just, I think, because oftentimes in the past, my assumption has been shy, not confident, quiet, easy, whatever. Then you see these big emotions and you think, well, where did that come from?
Yeah.
But you've missed the whole point, that they've been overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And their strategies they rely on to keep themselves safe, and those strategies we see.
Yeah.
They completely changed, but I have missed that and just thought, we've just kind of like the volcano, when people say they've just flipped their lid. They haven't just flipped their lid.
No. There's a whole lot that has happened internally, and that you just can't see that.
No.
And so those people, children, adolescents, adults that respond emotionally, we're still kind of thinking about this from a DMM perspective.
Yes.
And if you don't know what we're talking about, listeners, just go back a couple of episodes and have a listen, because then you'll kind of understand what we're talking about. So I think if we are now kind of considering emotional behavioural regulation and how to make sense of that, and we've talked about some different theories that we've used. You always will talk about polyvagal and go back to polyvagal. I kind of oscillate between, it's all attachment theory, really. You always use DMM in my brain. I think about DMM, but I also go back to kind of like good old standard attachment theory as well, secure, insecure, and types.
And types.
But I don't connect that to emotional behavioural regulation as much. But what I do connect is the impact that person's attachment experience has had on their internal working model, and then how that internal working model then influences emotional behavioural regulation.
Yes. And then do you attach or think about people's responses, especially to the emotive type? Is it type C?
Yeah, the one where it's
emotionally driven.
Yeah.
So if you think about type Cs, I have started to wonder lately, when you are a typical, type C, and generally, this is speaking very generally, people's responses to the way in which you're strategizing.
Yeah.
I wonder how much that then further impacts your internal working model. So say your internal working model is pretty negative, and you're overly, your strategy is you're very emotional to get your needs met, but then their reactions from others. And I think about then how people view others, from their internal working model perspective, and how they view the world, and how that can further just continue to cement this very negative internal working model, because their reactions from people, or the interactions then after they've, been very dysregulated and emotional, whatever the words you want to use, but how we then respond as a community, society, families, professionals, further can cement a really negative internal working model.
Because it would be so confusing.
Yes.
Because the way we respond to things is not often a choice. If we're thinking this is a reaction, and you don't always, unless you have a lot of insight about the way that you do things, you don't always understand why the other person is taken or misunderstood, or there's this disconnect in understanding why you might be so emotional, why you might be so upset, why maybe you may have behaved in the way that you did. Because to you, it's just the way you do things.
Yes.
That's the difference.
But it becomes another experience of, I didn't get my needs met. I can't trust you.
For sure.
And the world's not safe.
Yeah, for
so
sure.
It's just another notch on that negative internal working model, isn't it?
It's really tricky. And I mean, there's been a few people adults that I've worked with who have experienced, significant abuse in their lives, like significant. Some of them have been in out-of-home care, some of them haven't. And those adults who present with really emotional responses, that's their first response all of the time. They're quite reactive and have some real struggles with self-regulation. Those adults, generally speaking, that I've worked with, always feel so negative about who they are, because they feel like they must be terrible people because nobody actually understands them. And they can't make people understand them. And they try and form all these relationships and use control as a strategy to manage those relationships. And when control's not working, they then use these really quite highly emotive responses, which, exactly what you're saying, just distances themselves further from those relationships, and those relationships fail really quickly.
Yes.
And it does become this cycle where it's a bit like, I must be a terrible person. Nobody really understands me. Why doesn't anyone understand me? There must be something wrong with me.
Yeah. That person's going to leave anyway. This relationship's not going to last.
Yeah. Yeah. Or not even that. I don't think that they would even see that. Okay. It's like all in. Do you know? It's like an instant best friend. And so I might have met you yesterday, by, this time next week we're living together. Yeah. And you're going to be my one and only for the rest of my life. And then, in 3 weeks' time, the relationship's over.
The devastation.
Yeah.
That comes, yeah. Yes. And without that lens, I guess, and I've done it, I'm like, we lived together for 3 weeks, and the grief is so overwhelming. But when you put it in that perspective, and that was their strategy, and that's, it makes more sense, and it helps you be more trauma responsive, because you move from a position of, of easily just discarding or ignoring. We're not going to spend much time, talking about that. It's 3 weeks, let's move on, to actually it creates empathy for the person, but also the way in which you're then going to connect and go about your work with them is so different.
It's really different, because depending on the lens that you are making sense of that behavior, because imagine if you saw that from a mental health lens. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
You would think this person has some kind of personality disorder. This person is quite impulsive. This person may be quite narcissistic. Yeah, because it's all about them.
Yeah.
And maybe they are. But from a mental health lens, you're going to define that behavior so differently than, say, if you were to approach that scenario from an attachment lens.
It's such a good comparison to use, that lens.
Yeah.
Because I think both are so, we're comfortable in both lenses. Yeah. And it's really easy to understand just the difference of how then you would actually work with someone, depending if your lens on that particular day was mental health, or was it from a more attachment DMM model?
Yeah. It doesn't even have to be DMM though. Just attachment, from an attachment model.
Yeah.
Because, yeah.
Yeah.
But I also think if we then think about children, because we started this conversation with children and then I did get lost in the middle there, and I don't know how much of that will leave in. I kind of just lost my train of thought halfway through, which, if you know me, happens all the time, to be fair.
All the time.
But if we're thinking about this from children, and we started to talk about how emotional regulation and behavioural regulation can be seen as, ADHD or oppositional defiance disorder, or what's that new one that's out?
The RAD or the PAD or the
PAD. Is it PAD? I don't know. There was a link.
Something avoidance.
Recently I read.
Is it No.
Yeah, pathological avoidance something.
Disorder? No.
Anyway.
Whatever it is.
Some of you will know this far better than us. But I was reading this LinkedIn post about, it was talking about
PAD?
Yeah, PAD. And it was kind of telling this little story about it, if the child does this and the child does that and they feel this and they have strong feelings and blah, 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 then, don't look at this as a behavioural issue. Look at it from that lens of a PAD lens. And to me, I looked at it and I thought that could actually just be anything. I don't want to discount PAD because I don't know enough about it to discount it. But for me, I kind of think it's another label to attach to behaviours that already exist.
Yes.
Which is not wrong.
It's not wrong.
It helps you make sense of it. But I do wonder if we need another label.
I especially wonder for children, young people, adults who have experienced significant trauma. It's then I wonder about the labels.
Yeah.
Because I just think it's very opaque in relation to what is actually a trauma response.
Yeah.
What is the way in which their internal working model has been shaped, and the way in which they're trying to create and maintain safety for themselves, as opposed to a different label where they might, may or may not be medicated. But really, if the label's helpful, great. But if it's just, I'm adding another label to this child, like, how is that helpful?
The other thing I was going to add on to what you said, though, is how much of the behaviour and the emotions is a reaction to the conditions of the relationship.
To the current context.
Yes, because if the relationship is conditional, then you're always going to be actually internally triggered because you're always going to be feeling like I can't meet those conditions.
Yes. So true.
So true. Yeah. I try and have those conversations with people all the time around you need to be thinking about what are the conditions in the relationship. And I know at times I don't have that conversation well, and it's because of I'm maybe not having a good talking day or something.
Or it's 4:30 in the afternoon.
I mean, I just wouldn't have it at 4:30 in the afternoon unless I really had to. But when I try and have those conversations, I can see some people get it straight away. Some people, it's like the shutters go down. It's like I'm talking a different language. And I get it because it's hard to understand, because people will be like, what are you talking about conditions in the relationship? It's, what is the condition? That these are the parents and this is the child and they have to look after that child. But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the expectations of feeling connected and feeling loved and feeling a sense of belonging, and that when those expectations are linked to conditions that the child has to actually do for that, then that feeling of belonging, safety, security in return. That's what I'm talking about. When those conditions are actually linked to that kind of sense of belonging because of those expectations, then that's where you always actually are going to end up in a place of hurt. Because it's impossible to meet unwritten expectations when the bar keeps changing.
You think people's shutters go down because it's a blind spot for them, or because they just cannot have a conversation around that? Absolutely, I've put these unwritten expectations on this relationship, or is it something else?
I mean, I feel like sometimes it's probably 60% of the time it's probably the way that I've tried to explain it.
Really?
Yeah, true. I listen to myself at times, Rose, and I think, honestly, just be quiet. Like,
I do that all the time.
What are you even saying right now?
Like, did that even make sense, what you were saying, Rose?
Yeah. I honestly think 60% of the time it's because of the way I'm trying to, garble this response by trying to make it make sense. But then I think 40% of the time it's because maybe there are some feelings of feeling uncomfortable arising in that person and they're becoming dysregulated, and then that means they're actually not able to actively listen.
Yeah. Because I think it is interesting when you talk to people about, especially carers or parents, when they're struggling with a child that they're raising, is this a conditional relationship? What are the conditions of the relationship? And it's so easy to say, well, here are my expectations. I'm not asking about that though.
Yeah.
I'm asking about the unwritten rules.
Yeah.
Where is the point where you, as a parent carer, say,
yeah,
I'm not tolerating this and you're no longer welcome here?
Yeah.
What does that point look like? And how consistent, I think, are you in actually demonstrating the unconditional positive regard for that other person?
Yeah.
Not just making it something you do, you know, when that assessor comes to the care review of the gate and you've baked muffins, like that fakery that you talked about in one episode.
Yeah.
Like that, not like those ticker boxes. Not that, like what are the conditions here?
And how do the other people in this family know what those conditions are, or the expectations, or both?
Or both.
Like, how are they communicated? I mean, this is part of the ambiguous loss stuff, really, that the amazing Dr. Kenny Core came and talked to us about as well on one of our episodes. It's about how do you communicate what happens here? And whether that be a foster placement, a home, or whether that be like in an adult relationship between two people, how do we communicate our expectations and our conditions for each other?
And it's also about your nonverbal communication.
Yeah, for
and
sure.
I think often we just talk about the verbal communication.
Yeah.
Or the conversations had or not had, but there's a whole lot that comes from the way in which you're interacting nonverbally.
Yeah.
You're sending messages all the time nonverbally.
All the time. Yeah, all the time. It's that kind of that congruence between what you're saying and how you're saying it. It's like, you know, a DMM training actually gives a great example of that when something's incongruent. You know, when you have a kid with a big smile who actually looks really withdrawn or looks really sad, but when someone asks them a question, they have a big smile and they're kind of really into that people-pleasing kind of thing. There's a real disconnect there between the verbal and the non-verbal.
So interesting, isn't it?
Super interesting. It's super interesting. And I guess for me, one of the things that I constantly worry and struggle with, and I'm usually in two minds about, is about when we're thinking about emotional and behavioural regulation, is about how it is defined, particularly, say, in maybe a formal report. Because sometimes it has to be defined in a certain way to get additional funding, to get additional supports. And I struggle with that, but I also see the sense in defining something in a way that actually makes sure that this person gets additional support so that they won't get it, you know, otherwise.
So from a trauma-informed, trauma-responsive lens, you see the disconnect?
Yeah. Yeah, it's tricky.
It's so tricky.
Yeah.
Because, you know, you can't have your cake and eat it too all the time.
No.
You have to be able to, in certain settings, write and use language and labels so needs will be met. And without that, it's the general mainstream consensus of wherever that person is in that space. And that's also not helpful.
No, true. Very true. Very true. And some really good, I mean, a great example of that, really, if we're thinking about this, let's go back to children, just because it's so much easier to illustrate examples. But, you know, say in the education system, where a child has to have a label to actually attract, say, teacher's aid support or a placement in a particular unit, if that's required, they need to have a label. And it makes sense that they need to have a label because there has to be some criteria.
Yes.
But I do worry about how soon or whether that label becomes that person's identity as they move through.
Yes. And how it kind of then also can stop people from asking different questions or using other lenses to actually make circumstances or experiences different for that person, because we say, oh, you know, but we all know Rose has got this. And it kind of can be a full stop.
Yeah.
It's not always helpful for people to when things aren't going so well, to be curious around that, because it's just Rose and she's just got this label.
Yeah. But I think the other side of that is when the label is ignored. Do you know what I mean?
When it's too hard to do anything about.
When it's too hard. And instead of actually acknowledging that anything that happens around this person is going to be filtered through the particular way that they process information internally because of, just say they have ASD or something.
Yes.
But that's not considered. And
Yeah.
that's also really tricky.
It's so true, actually.
Yeah. And from a trauma responsive lens, you would be thinking about all of the different labels. Firstly, you know them. And then secondly, I mean, do you know, I'm going to tell you a story about that. Do you know, once when I was working in out-of-home care, I remember reviewing this kid's file, and this kid was about 10, maybe 10, maybe 9, 10, middle childhood. This kid had the longest list of diagnoses that I'd seen in a long time. Really long list of stuff. But then when I actually asked who made these diagnoses, turns out it was the carer.
Was the carer doctor?
No.
Psychologist?
No.
Okay.
And the caseworkers.
Oh.
And then suddenly written on this kid's file was all of these significant diagnoses that actually were not made by anyone who actually was able to do that. Instead, this child was demonstrating behaviours that these people had then said, well, that's got to be that. And I thought to myself, how ridiculous is it? How ridiculous is it? Because how much would that long list of diagnoses have actually informed casework that occurred? It would have been so significant.
I mean, I'm a little blown away. These are fictitious diagnoses.
Yes.
Diagnoses. What did they get from it?
So it got to the point where nobody actually questioned that this child was in a special unit at school.
Wow.
This child had additional funding based on these pretend diagnoses. Everything got blamed on the diagnoses. Everything. So, you know, the kid would have a bad day at school. They were quite emotional in the way that they reacted to things. It would be, it's because they have ODD. That's just their ODD. Or that's just their ADHD. They're really tricky. They're really difficult. If Pad was around, then that would have been another diagnosis as well. Yeah.
That's crazy.
It's crazy because the kid was not actually getting the support and the help they really needed. Really what they needed was some support with actually understanding their history. I mean, they needed a lot more than that, but some support, some trauma processing. They needed some good therapy.
Curious about the relationship in the household they were living in too.
You don't want me to talk about it.
I said I knew. I knew straight away that it wasn't going to be one of those amazing, unconditional, positive regard relationships where the carer was therapeutic.
No.
Just knew.
No, the carer was probably one of the worst people I've ever met in my life.
But see how the diagnosis then become the full stop. You don't have the lens to dig deeper, to be more curious, to consider what else could this be.
Yeah.
It could be that this child is, and I'm not saying that child was, but this child is in an abusive home. It could be that this child is, you know, the trauma responses are so pervasive and impacting daily, and the ambiguous loss, you know, has not been addressed. It could be so many different things, but we go, oh, well, it's ODD, full stop. No one does or says anything else.
But you know what it is? It's ODD, full stop. How good is that carer managing such big behaviours? It would be so tricky. Like, honestly, if we were swearing, I'd be swearing about that carer. That person was the worst person I've ever met in my life at that time. Like, horrible, horrible person. Should not be caring for a goldfish. Like, not caring for anything or anybody.
But I can imagine throughout the documentation how many comments were made about this person's skill and capability.
Yes.
And their endurance to sustain this placement given these, you know, challenging behaviours. And then the label we attach to that, don't we?
Yeah.
And the esteem we hold people in then.
Yes.
And then what does Eileen Munro say? We just continue to collect information that reinforces what we think we know.
Yeah, well, that's what was happening in this situation. And because the carer, when challenged, was really horrible to work with, it was easier for caseworkers not to challenge. And I get that. They got a lot on.
And that's a great strategy though, isn't it? You just become this, very challenging person, have challenging interactions. People generally don't enjoy conflict. They don't want to be in it.
No.
We'll tiptoe around it. We'll avoid it. We'll sweep it under the rug.
Yeah.
We'll do anything to not have to feel unpleasantly challenged in conflict.
No. And we won't
typically.
We won't question anything they say because they're a saint, because they're putting up with this kid. And where else would we put this kid?
With all these 12 diagnoses, no one's going to want them. You must maintain this placement at all costs.
Yep. Anyway, sideline. That was a sideline conversation.
But it's relevant if you used a trauma responsive lens. The difference, and clearly you did, the different hypotheses you could come up with, and then how your work is different to support the actual child or young person or your client.
I mean, for me, the first thing that I said was you actually need to know what diagnosis, if any, this child has. Like, that's the first step. I know.
Did they go and get diagnosed with all these?
No, they didn't. No, they didn't end up with all those diagnoses because it was not something that was accurate. It was not something that was accurate. Definitely ended up with a couple, but not like the long list that there was.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, insane. Insane that this had just been allowed to continue.
Yeah.
And no one had questioned it. We have to be curious, people. We have to be curious all the time.
Yes. And applying, different lenses.
Yeah.
Challenging, ourselves and others.
And I think one of the things that I've really learned, and I've learned this with practice, it's not like it's something I knew when I was, probably a few years out. So I've learned this with practice, is that if somebody actually is upset at you challenging them, it depends how you challenge. But you can challenge quite respectfully. Then you have to question the motivation for that upsetness. What is that about?
Yes. Is it a strategy to throw you off so you stop challenging?
Yeah.
Because there's something there?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. You always have to be curious about that. And whether that's whoever it is you're working with and whatever setting you're working in, I think this is not just a child protection thing or an out-of-home care thing. I think it's an across-the-board thing. If someone is uncomfortable with your challenge and you're challenging in a quite respectful, soft way, if that's the way you should be challenging.
Man, I'd love to be able to do that.
I've seen you do that.
Have you?
Yeah.
Okay.
But if they're instantly upset about that, then yeah, you have to think about it. Why?
Why
are they so upset?
Yes.
Could I have done it better? Because maybe it's about you. Or is it about, like you say, is there a reason why that strategy of not reacting well when somebody challenges has served them well in the past for a particular reason?
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, people are complex and we kind of get stuck in our own ways, don't we, in terms of how we process information, how we then present information, how we present our emotions, how we present everything.
Yeah. And some people are just not self-aware either. Some people you meet don't have high emotional intelligence and aren't really self-aware.
I mean, and some people are just, not nice.
It's a nice way of saying what I was thinking.
Swear word there. Who was it? I was texting with my friend yesterday, actually, and we were talking about someone that we both dislike, and I said something in response to her message, and she said, "That's a very nice way and a very unusually kind way to describe that person." And I replied and said, "Yeah, thanks for calling me out." It's not what I meant.
It's not what I meant. Read between the lines.
I meant to say, and then I did swear. But yeah. Rose, can we talk a little more about assessing motivation for dysregulation?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that is something that's kind of interesting. And it's one of those things where if I was listening to this at home, I'd be like, well, that's all good. You just talked for half an hour about that. But how do you do what it is that you're saying to do? How do you actually assess for motivation? Because it's tricky and it's hard.
It is really hard.
And I think it depends on who it is you're working with, like whether it's a child, whether it's an adult, whether it's a, couple, whether it's a family situation, whether, there's been lots of trauma, whether, blah, blah, blah. It's really contextually driven.
How do we assess for the motivation?
Well, I guess let's kind of define what motivation is, what we're talking about. So we are really talking about that kind of subconscious, physiological drive or reason why we might respond in the way that we do. That's kind of what we're talking about when we think about motivation. And I think the first step to assessing for motivation is about being curious about what it is that you're seeing. Don't you?
Yeah. So are you talking about, Jodie, I'm noticing today that you're, a little flat, really struggling to look at me, which is pretty unusual in the context of our relationship.
Yep.
And it's really hard for you to be engaged, to be here in this session. Are you talking about those, like when you're saying, here's what I'm noticing?
I think in a therapeutic setting, you would definitely be, you would be using curious questioning. But I also wonder if it's about what you said before, Rose, about taking notice of the nonverbal and the verbal. So what is the nonverbal?
Telling you.
Yeah, telling you. And then internally trying to work out, well, how do I make sense of this? Is it I have to ask curious questions? Is it I have to go back to the information to find out a little bit more about this? Is there another way forward?
Is it me?
Is it me?
I always ask that. Is it me?
Yeah.
Is it that it's this time?
Yeah.
And this is hard, depending on what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I always ask that though. Is it me? And is it what we're actually doing? And then I think that often is probably my first question. And then I will ask general questions around if it's in a therapeutic setting, what were you doing right before coming here or me coming?
Mm.
And if they will, tell you this story where they were obviously very different, I then think, oh, that's interesting. So is it me or is it what we're about to talk about, or has something happened and they want to talk about it, but it's difficult for them?
Yeah. And how do you know which one it is?
Which one it is, yeah.
Yeah. Which I think if you are trauma responsive, it's about developing like, how you have that like imaginary toolbox of stuff. It's like having in that little toolbox some like strategies for all of the possibilities so that you can use them when you need them.
Yes.
So curious questions being, well, first you're saying insight, having insight first. Curious questions is another little strategy in your toolbox. That relating back to the context, what is understanding the context is a really good strategy that you can pretty much do with anybody. Asking those questions around what were you doing before you came here? Tell me about your day so far. Maybe what's going to happen when you leave here. Kind of understanding that kind of interpersonal context, I guess, a little better.
Yeah.
And seeing whether the person changes when they're talking about that stuff compared to what you're seeing then and there.
Then and there, yeah.
So one of the things that I always do, and I can do this with pretty much anybody, is that I do what you said before. I do reflect back what I'm seeing. And I just ask like quite direct questions, which I know is kind of probably not. In therapy, it's that you need to lead the person to the answer themselves. But I
think that depends on what frame you're in.
Well, yeah.
Because I ask a lot of direct questions.
Yeah, I ask a lot of direct questions too. Because if I was sitting in therapy and somebody was going, and how does that make you feel? And blah, 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 and blah, blah. I'd honestly want to kick them in the face. Like I would. I would find it really frustrating.
Yes. I think my eyes would roll. How does that make you feel? Really?
Yeah.
1, there's an assumption of emotional literacy here. 2, an assumption that the relationship is trusting enough that I'm actually going to tell you exactly how I freaking feel.
Yeah.
And 3, what is the point of asking how it's going to make them feel if you're actually not doing emotional literacy? So you've put the cart before the horse. So no.
True.
That's how I feel about that question.
Yeah, true. I think in some scenarios and some situations it's a really valid question, but it can't be the go-to question.
No, and it can't be.
So I think I would always be curious, and I would actually say, right now I'm seeing this. I'm seeing that your face is changing. I'm seeing that you look really uncomfortable. I'm seeing that this, I'm seeing that.
Yes.
Can you tell me what that's about? How's your body feeling right now? How's your brain feeling right now? What's happening for you inside?
Yes. I saw a young man that I'm doing therapeutic life story work with pretty recently. And he has a sister, and I've completed therapeutic life story work with her. So I've been in this household, and it has given me a huge advantage with the carer and just knowing how the household is.
Yeah.
But recently I knocked on the door and he answered with that fake smile, you know, what you were talking about before. Hi, would you like to see my new bed? And I was like, yeah, I would. And he walked like this with this smile. And I was like, oh.
It's so noticeable, isn't it? When you know what it is you're looking for, it's so noticeable.
So noticeable. And he was like, yeah, here's my bed.
So it's all for show.
And I was like, wow, okay. And I said, how are you going today? Yeah, really good. As he's walking to the dining room table. And we sat down and I looked at the carer and I said, how are you? And she said, I'm really unsure. I don't know what is happening. And I was like, awesome. And so I said, because I'd been in this household a lot, do you have a little Kit Kat stashed in your cupboard? Because often this carer does. And she said, no, I've run out. And I was like, oh, have you got any juice or strawberries? Or she said, yes. I said, are you hungry? And he said, not really. I said, how about we just try, though, having a juice or a strawberry? So I just thought, I wonder what's going to happen if you just have a little bit of a, sugar. So he gets up as he's walking to the kitchen, and the carer said to me, I don't know what's happened, but this is day 2. And I said, okay. So we rolled out the wallpaper and he walked in and he went, and I was like, wow, okay. So I asked a few questions about the day, his day, and I didn't get much. And I said, tell me about yesterday. What happened yesterday? What did you do? And he said, I went to a party. I was like, well, that doesn't sound like much fun, does it? No, it was lots of fun. Was it? It was. It's like, inside I'm like, well, that's just so incongruent, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I said, what's the best bit about the party? And he said, leaving. And I've worked with this child for a few weeks. So I said, what was the worst thing about the party? And he was put on show by his friends, and everyone laughed at him.
Right.
And I said, that sounds really tough.
Yeah.
And he was like, yeah. And I thought, I know this kid. It's upsetting for him, absolutely, but that's not what's happening here. And in my polyvagal lens, I was thinking, this child's in shutdown. And we have done polyvagal work, him and I. And for children, we use dolphin brain, which is safe and social. Fox brain is fight, flight, and bear brain is shut down. And I said, let's call him Isaac. Isaac, are you in your bear brain? I said, yeah, I can tell you're in bear brain. I said, but it's almost like you're trying to pretend you're not in bear brain. And he goes, yeah. I said, okay. And he goes, are you going to ask me why? I said, no. And I in therapeutic life story work, we draw a red circle. And I said, tell me what you don't want to talk about.
Yeah.
And he said, I don't want to talk about being in class on Monday when we talked about neglect and physical abuse. And I said, okay.
I love that strategy. I do a box.
Okay.
Let's put all our worries and the things we don't want to talk about in the box, because then they write it in and you know it.
You know it, yeah. He said he just kind of threw the text across the table. He couldn't even write.
Yeah.
I'll talk. I don't want to talk about it, but I'll tell you, you write it.
Yeah.
I don't want to talk about. On Monday in class, we talked about neglect and physical abuse. And I looked at the carer and she was like, light bulb moment. She said, what do you mean, Isaac? And he said, we spent a lot of time talking about it and my whole class turned and looked at me because they know I'm the kid in care.
Poor Isaac.
So that was Monday. The party was Tuesday where his friends had, put him on show or whatever.
Yeah.
And I said to him, it's been a really tough week then, hey? He goes, yep. And I said, and then I've come. And he goes, and tears started rolling, and you're going to want to talk. And I said, I mean, yeah, that's what I came for. But as I'm rolling the wallpaper up, and I said, would you like something to eat? And he stopped. He hadn't eaten in 2 days. I didn't know this, though. He's not a great eater, but I didn't know this. He said, did she ask you to get me to eat? I said, no. And she is, I said, absolutely not. I just know when I'm in my bear brain, I don't really particularly want to eat. But what do we know about climbing back up into our fox brain and our dolphin brain? And he said, I need to eat. And I was like, yeah. So what is it that you would want to eat right now? And he said something ridiculous, like a mini lemon lime cheesecake. And I was like, well, do we have one of them? And we laughed, and he kind of was like, ha, ha, ha. But the co-regulation of just this conversation with a very calm and gentle voice. And I said to him, what's your next best thing that's in the house that you might want to eat? So we went and got something out of the kitchen. We put the wallpaper away, and he came out. He said, what are you doing? I said, we're going to play a game of Uno. He said, I don't want to play Uno. I said, okay, can we try? We played a hand of Uno, and his body language went from, really slumped and disinterested to, and I was like, I'm going to beat you. And I'm always going to beat him. And I say it to every kid I play with, I'm not letting you win. So don't think, I am competitive as all, and I'm going to beat you at this round of, anyway, the carer beat us. And I was like, so unfair, round 2. We did 2 games of Uno. And then I said to him, have you got taco, cat, goat, cheese, pizza? Because I had gifted that to the family from, a year ago.
That's a card game.
Card game where you've got to use your hands and you don't have much time to think about anything but playing the game.
Yeah.
And he goes, yep. And he went to get the card game, and instead of slumping in his body and walking like, typically I'm so depressed, he walked a little bit differently. And the carer said, oh, I think he's coming around. I said, we just need to stay in this state of play and not we're not talking about anything.
Yeah.
Let's just see we played taco, cat, goat, cheese, pizza twice.
Yeah.
He won the second game, and I was like, well, that's unfair. Let's have a redraw. And he said, all right. I said, actually, I've got No Mercy in my bag. Let's play this. This is a really tricky game. And that game is typically, I would say, more for older children. Isaac's only about 10. And I generally would say 11, 12-year-olds, because it's kind of like a harsh game where you're shitting on each other. It's really like, I'm going to get you. But I thought, I'm going to give this a go and just see how. We played a round of No Mercy, and he won. We played another round, and I think the carer won. I think I lost every.
I was going to say,
I lost every card.
Doesn't sound like you won any game.
None.
Yeah.
And he said, you haven't. I think on the last one, you haven't won a round. I said, I know. I must be losing my spark. And he said, are you trying? I said, I'm trying my very best.
Yeah.
I want to beat you.
Yeah, I say that every time too.
And he giggled. I was consistent. I wasn't, because he was in his bear brain, going to let him win that card game. That's not consistency or reliability or predictability. 1 hour.
Yeah.
None of what I purposely went there to do, which was therapeutic life story work. None of that timeline got done. The wallpaper, I think we had the circle and it was rolled up and put away. From an organisational perspective, I'm so lucky that I am privately contracted and I can say to the agency funding me, I wasn't able to actually do therapeutic life story work yesterday. And years ago, that would have really worried me. But when I did this, I was like, I will argue with anyone that was not what was needed in that space, because he was in no state.
Well, no.
To do any therapeutic anything.
Well, because you're being trauma responsive. What a great example of assessing for motivation for behaviours and emotions and trauma responsiveness. That's a great example of both of those things.
Well, I do, as the carer walked me to the door and he was off, he was absolutely more regulated than what he was when I entered the house.
Yeah.
She said to me, I cannot believe the school have, sat him through this.
Yeah.
Because they had applied for an exemption. And I'm like, it's okay. I'll write a letter to the agency in the school. He struggles in therapeutic life story work to talk about his experiences, and he was significantly abused and neglected. It is no space for him in a classroom. I understand the context and the subject material needs to occur, but he does not need to be part of that.
No.
So then I, advocated for his right not to be in the next 6 sessions of school we're doing, because he's going to be so dysregulated then at school. He had learnt nothing all week. He's at home, generally he's normally in his fox brain. So it was interesting to me that he was so far into his bear brain, so far down that ladder, because generally he is in fight flight. So I was like, oh, let's see if the school can be trauma responsive and take him out of class when they're doing that. He does not need to sit in class and learn about child protection dynamics when that's his experience and it is so pervasive and he struggles with it. And unfortunately, his whole class know he's the out-of-home care kid.
Yeah. I've had lots of conversations in the last few weeks with children out of home care about, you're not the only one, don't you? And so many kids have no idea.
They're not the only one.
They're not the only one. They just feel so isolated and so like this is just something that happens to them.
Yeah.
There's one particular agency that I do a lot of work with who I just admire so much because they do camps. They have really lots of informal get-togethers for the kids that's led by the team. So the caseworkers go as well.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like it's not always about the work. They bring that social lens as well, that social kind of communication style. And it does so much in terms of reparative care.
Well, because it's about holistically identity and well-being, isn't it? Because you are not the only one and you can actually see all these other kids or young people are like me.
And it is that connection, but it's the connection with other people who may understand your experience a little bit better, but it's also connection with the caseworkers, the team, the people who will make your decisions about you.
Yeah.
They get to know you in a different way and you get to know them in a different way. It is such a great strategy that they do. It's like I said, it's so reparative.
Yeah. It's pretty cool.
It's really cool. All right. Well, I reckon we probably said enough then. Like your example was amazing. I think your example was everything in terms of that I would have said out.
I think though, 10 years ago, if you had told me that I would have sat for an hour playing, taco, cat, goat, cheese, pizza and, No Mercy with a child, and that would have been...
You would have been so uncomfortable with that idea.
I would have, and I would have been thinking, well, there's no therapeutic point to that.
Yeah.
And genuinely, it was one of the most therapeutic sessions that I've engaged in the last year.
Can I take a little bit of, I don't know, like kudos from that? I don't know. It's probably got nothing to do with me, but it makes me think all those times I kind of just talk at you about that. I feel, oh, that's really nice.
Yeah.
I know it's got nothing to do with me. It's all about you.
It probably does have a lot to do with you because generally before, this is my purpose. This is what I'm here for today and we're going to do this and we'll do it. 10 years ago, absolutely. 5 years ago, that's how I would have gone in. Or even, a few years ago thinking, well, I'm a private practitioner. I'm getting paid to be here to do this therapeutic life story work. I'm not getting paid to sit here and play Uno.
You would have felt so uncomfortable.
So uncomfortable.
Like you just wasted everyone's time. That's how you would have felt about that.
But I walked out of there and I was like, well, I mean, it was so internally resourctive for me because I was like, stay at the top of your ladder, and the non-responses. And when anyone cries, I feel, and I'm a crier. When he was crying, I was like, oh, you can't cry, Rose, and don't fall down there with him, And the carer, she's an amazing carer, and I wish there were 500,000 carers like her. And she said, I wonder why you didn't tell me, because I have a really good relationship. And I said, there could be so many reasons. Is that the rabbit hole you want to go down this afternoon?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's not about you.
I've said those exact words to another carer quite recently. It's actually not about you.
Yeah.
So you just need to kind of shelve that thinking because it's not useful, it's not relevant. I mean, that's how I'm directed times.
Well, yeah, because it's honest though. It's true.
Yeah.
But it's not, she could spend 12 hours down that rabbit hole questioning, double questioning their relationship, wondering why, what she did, what she didn't do.
Yeah.
Not helpful.
No.
I said, because she's been in the session, she knows Polyvagal too.
Yeah.
We know what he's like when he's in his fox brain and we know what he's like in his dolphin brain. What are you doing this afternoon? And she's like, I'm going to cook his favourite meal, lasagna. She's like, holy moly, that's going to take me a while, but I'm going to do it. We're going to put on his favourite movie. We're going to eat lasagna and snuggle on the lounge to his favourite movie. I was like, ideal. And tomorrow morning, she's like, I might get him up to go for a walk. Perfect.
Yeah. Perfect. She sounds amazing.
She is amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, I reckon we're done. You reckon we're done?
I think we were able to, I guess, talk about what trauma responsive is and what it looks like practically.
Gotcha.
And the benefits of it.
I mean, I think so, but I guess people listening to this hopefully made it to this point and will let us know if we didn't, but I think we did.
Please let us know.
I mean, I think we've talked about trauma responsiveness in so many different episodes. We just haven't called it that.
Yeah. Just linking.
Yeah, we're just linking. That's right.
Yeah.
All right, well, that does bring us to the end of another episode of Relational Practice, a social work podcast. We hope today's discussion was valuable for your practice.
And to ensure you're always in the loop, please follow our podcast. Your subscription and social media engagement helps us build our community and make these conversations, hopefully, that are, helpful for your practice, more accessible to other practitioners.
Yeah, absolutely. Can I just say something on that, Rose? Do you know someone recently said to me, like this week said to me, your podcast is just so good for my learning. And I just find that one I said before really kind of embarrassing, but also good. But I honestly feel like we just sit here and just talk. Sometimes, shit, really. And my brain goes and I don't always know what I'm saying. And I think, wow, I'm glad you find it useful. Anyway,
let's hope that was genuine feedback.
Yeah.
That was the point.
Oh my God, I didn't even think that it wasn't genuine.
See, we're so different. It's always my first question.
Okay.
Anywho, hopefully it is informative and educational to a point, and I'm sure there are parts where it's not, because it's us.
That's true.
All right, thanks for listening and tuning in. Stay safe and remember to always practice relationally.
All right, see ya.
Bye.
The